Go ahead and decide whether I was wrong before you hear why I did it. I was the one who kept our marriage moving while my husband treated love like another schedule he could organize. I had spent years being useful, dependable, and almost invisible. Spending one night at my best friend's place was not betrayal. It was freedom. My husband only turned his phone face down and straightened the place cards between us, the way he always did when he had nothing real to say. By the end of that weekend, everyone would finally understand why I had chosen myself. My name is Delaney Mercer. I was 34, and as Senior Partnerships Manager for Harbour Arts Foundation, I could make strangers feel important, while my husband, of course, could sit beside me and miss the point. When I was nervous, I counted things. 3 unanswered messages, 5 crooked chairs, 7 cream place cards that refused to stay straight. I was not cruel. I was tired of being useful and almost invisible. Spending one night at my male best friend's loft was not betrayal. It was the first choice I had made for myself in years. My husband only turned his phone face down and aligned the place cards between us, the way he always did when he had nothing real to say. By Saturday night, everyone would understand why I had stopped asking permission. The ballroom at the Beaumont Hotel smelled of orange polish and dust. I had spent 6 hours arranging the foundation's spring dinner. Cream cards covered 14 tables. Each name was written in my hand. I remembered allergies, rivalries, and children accepted into college. People called it charm because they never saw the work behind it. My husband arrived through the service corridor carrying fries and corrected transport schedules. During our first year of marriage, he waited outside every major event with fries because I was too nervous to eat beforehand. We sat in his old car with the windows fogged while I told him which donor had lied and which speech had gone too long. He listened then. Or maybe I had needed less. That afternoon, he confirmed our daughter Sophie's weekend plans with my sister and fixed a mistake in the hotel pickup list. He did not mention my new dress hanging behind the stage. My husband solved 2 problems and looked satisfied, as if that counted as seeing me. I told him I would not come home after Saturday's dinner. Luca Serrano, my best friend since college, was hosting a gathering at his downtown loft, and I planned to stay in his guest room because I would probably drink. My husband asked whether that had already been decided. His soft voice irritated me more than anger would have. I told him Luca had a guest room, I trusted him, and taking a taxi across the city at 3 in the morning made no sense. My husband asked why a nearby hotel made less sense than sleeping in another man's home. I heard the accusation immediately. Questions were how he hid judgment. Luca had known me for 15 years and had never crossed a line. Adults in healthy marriages did not need permission to see friends. My husband looked at Nora Chen's place card beneath his fingers. He straightened it with the table edge, then adjusted the 2 beside it until all 3 formed a perfect line. 1, 2, 3. He asked what had changed because 6 months earlier I had agreed that overnight visits with Luca made him uncomfortable. I told him what had changed was me. For years I had arranged my time around school pickups, his late work hours, and everyone else's comfort. Whenever I said I felt buried under the role of wife and mother, he offered a calendar or a new schedule. After my mother died, he managed the funeral and labelled every document. He never asked whether I was afraid of becoming as forgotten as she had. Luca had asked. Cassidy had asked. My husband had brought folders. He said he knew he had failed me, but this was not about my mother. I told him that was exactly the problem. He decided which pain belonged in which conversation, then filed everything until it stopped making noise. He asked whether I wanted freedom, or whether I wanted him to approve something I already knew would hurt him. The question landed too close, so I dismissed it. I told him he had 2 choices. He could accept that I would spend the night at Luca's loft, or he could lose me. The ballroom was silent except for a cart rattling behind the service doors. My husband turned his phone face down. Then he aligned the last cream card. He said I was an adult and could choose where I slept. I waited for a protest. a promise, proof that losing me still frightened him. Nothing came. Of course, I understood his calm. When a marriage needed heat, he became quiet and useful. I picked up my purse. He asked whether I still planned to have breakfast with Sophie on Sunday. I said yes, though I had not considered when Luca's gathering would end. My husband nodded once and left the fries untouched. A minute later, Luca sent me a photograph of his guest room with wine beside the bed. Cassidy replied that my husband needed to understand he had married a woman, not hired a household manager. By Saturday, I would place Luca beside me and leave without apologizing. My husband could watch me choose my own life. This time, the room would see who had made me disappear. Luca's loft occupied the top floor of an old printing warehouse near the river. The elevator opened directly into a wide room with brick walls, low lamps, and windows that made the city look expensive. Everything inside seemed chosen for photographs. 2 velvet chairs faced the skyline. 4 bottles of wine waited on the counter. 6 candles burned along the windows, though the room was already warm. I counted them while Luca took my coat. He told me I looked like a woman who had finally escaped a meeting she never agreed to attend. That was how Luca spoke. He could turn ordinary frustration into a story where I was brave. My husband never did that. He asked whether I had eaten. Luca asked whether I felt alive. Cassidy arrived 10 minutes after me carrying a small camera and a silver bag of makeup. She kissed my cheek, looked around the loft, and said the night was exactly what I needed. Of course, she understood. Cassidy had spent years telling me I apologized too often, though she avoided conflict in her own life whenever possible. She liked courage best when someone else had to pay for it. The gathering was smaller than the foundation dinner. A local painter stood near the windows. 2 hotel investors spoke with Luca about the railway hall. A woman from an architecture magazine asked whether I was involved in the project. Luca answered before I could. He said the entire idea would be ordinary without me. The words stayed with me. My husband had corrected the transport schedule that afternoon. Luca had made me sound essential. Cassidy filmed a short video beside the windows. She asked me to explain why women should not disappear inside marriage. I said no one should have to ask permission to remain themselves. She encouraged me to speak more directly, so I added that love without freedom was only control with softer language. Cassidy posted the clip before I watched it. Within 20 minutes, strangers began praising my honesty. One woman wrote that she had also become invisible after marriage. Another said she wished she had my courage. I read the comments twice, then a third time. My husband had sent 2 messages. The first asked whether I planned to come home before Sophie woke up. The second said Sophie had a fever and wanted to speak to me. I placed the phone face down. Luca noticed the movement and asked whether everything was fine. I told him Sophie had a small fever and my husband was handling it. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. Sophie had left a voice message asking me to sing the song I used when she could not sleep. I listened to the first 5 seconds and stopped it. I told myself calling would only excite her and make the fever worse. The decision felt practical until the wine made it easier to forget. Around midnight, most guests left. Cassidy remained beside the record player, editing clips while Luca opened another bottle. He told me the Railway Hall project could become more than a foundation partnership. He wanted to create a private series of cultural events, and he wanted me to become the public face. I asked what that meant. He said I had spent years building other people's names and deserved to build my own. No one had ever said it so simply. The foundation treated my relationships as company property. My husband treated my work as something that required backup plans. Luca treated my contacts as proof of power. He asked whether I still had access to the leather contact book Adrian's father had left him. My husband had trusted me with that book when I first joined Harbour Arts. It contained private numbers, family details, old favours, and handwritten notes about people who had known his father for decades. Adrian had warned me that relationships were not resources. At the time, I agreed. Now Luca only wanted a few names connected to the railway project. I photographed 6 pages, then 3 more, 9 pages. I counted before sending them. Luca promised he would not contact anyone without speaking to me first. I believed him because I wanted the launch to be large enough that the foundation could not ignore my value. Cassidy looked up from her camera when she heard the last photograph send. Her smile weakened for half a second. She asked whether those contacts belonged to Harbour Arts. I told her they belonged to people, not institutions, and that Adrian did not own them. She nodded, but she did not repeat that I was brave. By 2 in the morning, Cassidy left with the painter. Luca offered me the guest room. I stayed. Nothing physical happened. That became the line I used to protect every other choice. I changed into one of Luca's shirts because wine had spilled on my dress. We sat on the balcony while the river moved below us. Luca said he had often wondered what would have happened if we had chosen each other after college. I admitted I had wondered too. My phone rang again. My husband's name lit the screen. This time I watched until it stopped. The next morning I returned home after 10. Sophie was asleep on the sofa under a yellow blanket. My husband sat beside her with a bowl of cold water and a folded towel. He turned his phone face down when I entered, then aligned the medicine bottle with the edge of the table. He asked why I had ignored him while Sophie was crying for me. I said my phone had been charging in the guest room. That was my first deliberate lie. My husband looked at me for several seconds. Then he said the family account showed the notifications had reached my phone. The detail did not fit the passive man I had described online. I called it surveillance. He said he had checked because his daughter was sick and his wife had disappeared after threatening to end their marriage. I told him fathers were expected to care for their children without using it as proof against the mother. His expression changed. Not anger. Something tired. He described Sophie standing at the bathroom door with sickness in her hair, asking when I would come home. I told him I was allowed 1 night for myself. He answered that the issue was not the night. It was that I had watched him call and chosen not to answer. I walked upstairs before he could continue. Later, at the foundation boardroom, Nora Chen was already speaking with my husband. She thanked him for sending such a clear timeline. I assumed they meant the dinner transport schedule. Of course, Adrian could make a timeline out of breathing. Nora then asked whether Luca had received private community contacts. I said he had received names connected to the project. Priya sat at the end of the table and kept her eyes on her laptop. She wanted a promotion and had no interest in becoming a witness inside my marriage. Luca arrived late carrying coffee for me. He placed his hand on the back of my chair and praised my vision in front of everyone. My husband watched the contact for 1 second, then turned his phone face down and aligned the papers before him. I read the silence as weakness. After the meeting, the video from Luca's loft passed 12,000 views. People called me brave. By the rooftop reception, I planned to announce the railway partnership with Luca standing beside me. My husband would finally see that the life he had reduced to schedules could grow without him. The rooftop reception above the Armitage Hotel was supposed to become the night people stopped seeing me as an employee and started seeing me as the person behind the foundation's success. Wind moved between the glass walls, carrying the smell of rain and warm metal from the buildings below. White lights hung over 14 tables. 120 cream place cards waited beside polished glasses. 6 sponsor banners stood near the stage. 3 bottles of champagne were hidden beneath the main table for my announcement. I counted every detail because counting kept pressure clean. My husband arrived in the dark suit I had chosen for him years earlier. He looked rested, which annoyed me more than it should have. Guests greeted him warmly. Adrian remembered quiet details about people without needing an audience. He knew which donor had recovered from surgery and whose daughter had applied to medical school. He never turned those memories into stories about himself. That was why people trusted him. It was also why they never understood what living with him felt like. Luca arrived 20 minutes later with Cassidy and a small camera crew. The energy around him changed at once. People turned toward him. He touched shoulders, remembered compliments, and made everyone feel as if the event had become more interesting because he had entered it. Cassidy told me the evening would produce the strongest content we had made. Of course, she was right. The original seating plan placed my husband beside me and Nora Chen on my other side. Luca's place belonged near the stage with the private investors. I changed it before dinner. I lifted Adrian's cream card, slipped it inside my clutch, and wrote Luca's name on a blank one. My husband found his new seat at the far end of the table between Priya and an elderly donor who struggled to hear. He looked at the empty space where his name had been. Then he turned his phone face down and aligned the fork, knife, and water glass in front of him. 1, 2, 3. I read the movement correctly. He had decided not to embarrass himself by objecting. Dinner passed in careful stages. Each time Luca made me laugh, I allowed the sound to carry. Each time he touched my arm, I let his hand remain for 1 second longer. My husband watched only when he thought I was not looking. Cassidy filmed short clips from the next table. Priya glanced at her camera once and then focused on her plate. Nora barely ate. After dessert, I stood and moved toward the microphone. My speech had been saved on my phone for 6 days, but I no longer needed to read it. I thanked the sponsors first. I praised Harbour Arts and described how abandoned buildings could receive new purpose. Then I moved away from the safe words. I told the room that buildings were not the only things trapped inside old roles. Several guests laughed softly. That gave me confidence. I explained that women were praised for being dependable until dependability became a cage. I said I had spent years asking for space while being treated as if independence were betrayal. The room became quieter, but I mistook attention for support. I told them Luca had reminded me what belief looked like. He listened to my ideas without turning them into schedules, risks, or household problems. He did not ask me to become smaller so he could feel secure. My husband looked directly at me from the far end of the table. His face remained still. That stillness pushed me further. I announced that Luca and I would spend the next weekend at his coastal house, developing the railway project. Then I made the choice clear. My husband could trust me and remain part of my life, or he could refuse and lose me. No one moved. The silence was not the reaction I had imagined, so I smiled harder. Luca stood near the stage with one hand inside his pocket. Cassidy lowered her camera by several inches. Adrian did not defend himself. He did not raise his voice or accuse me of betrayal. Instead, he turned toward the event videographer and asked her to preserve the complete recording, including everything before and after my speech. I almost laughed. The room was full of tension, and my husband was worried about files. Of course, that was Adrian. He could turn humiliation into administration. The videographer nodded. Then Adrian asked the hotel manager to close our family card on the shared event account. Any private charges after that point would need separate approval. I heard punishment. The manager heard an instruction. Nora watched both men without blinking. My husband finally stood and walked toward the stage. He placed his phone face down on the nearest table and straightened the edge of Luca's cream place card. He asked whether I had meant the ultimatum both privately and publicly. His voice remained quiet. That made the question sound almost polite. I told him I had meant every word. He asked whether trust could be demanded through public humiliation. I answered that embarrassment was not the same as harm. If hearing the truth embarrassed him, he should examine why. That was the part people online would understand. My husband studied my face for several seconds. Something painful moved behind his control, but I treated it as proof that I still had power. He said he would take a taxi home. I reminded him that Sophie was staying with Tessa and there was no reason to rush. He said Sophie had asked him to stay until she fell asleep. The sentence touched something I did not want opened. I counted 4 lights above the stage and returned to the microphone. I invited everyone to applaud the Railway Hall partnership. Some people clapped. Others lifted their glasses without smiling. Luca joined me and placed his arm around my waist while Cassidy took the photograph. My husband passed the video station on his way out and quietly pointed toward the recording monitor. I assumed he wanted a copy so he could replay the evening and prove how much I had hurt him. After he left, 2 sponsors departed before coffee. Priya refused Luca's invitation to continue at his loft. Nora spoke privately with the hotel manager. Cassidy stayed, but she checked her phone instead of celebrating. When I asked whether the speech had been powerful, she said it had certainly been clear. I heard approval because approval was what I needed. Near the elevator, I found Adrian's original cream place card inside my clutch. One corner had bent. I straightened it, dropped it into a bin, and took Luca's hand. The photographs were already spreading online. My next move would be larger. I would turn the railway opening into my own public launch, and by then my husband would either accept the life I was offering or remove himself from it. Both outcomes still looked like victory. Tessa invited me to dinner 3 days after the rooftop reception. She said Sophie wanted to bake cookies with her cousins, but of course that was only part of the reason. Her dining room looked like our mother's old one. Pale curtains, heavy chairs, and a fruit bowl nobody touched. 4 apples, 3 oranges, 5 marks. I counted while she poured tea. Tessa asked whether I understood what Sophie had seen online. I told her a 9-year-old should not have unrestricted access to social media. She said other children had shown Sophie the edited video. The clip began with my speech about disappearing inside marriage and ended after the ultimatum. Without the silence, I looked brave. Without the room, my husband looked controlling. Tessa asked why I needed strangers to agree with me before speaking honestly to him. She had always been visible while I handed out programs. I told her she could not understand what it meant to become background inside your own life. Tessa said I turned private pain into a public vote because I did not trust affection unless witnesses confirmed it. I stood to leave. She asked whether I wanted Sophie to believe love was proved by forcing someone to accept humiliation. I told her not to use my daughter against me. When I returned home, my husband sat in the living room holding one of Sophie's drawings. 3 people stood outside a blue house. The smallest held both adults' hands. He had folded the paper once between the larger figures. He turned his phone face down and aligned the drawing with the table. He asked whether I remembered Sophie's birthday treasure hunt. One clue had led her to the front steps where we drank Sunday coffee. Briefly, I saw the fries after events, the blankets on cold mornings, and the quiet that had once felt safe. Then I closed the door on it. Routines were not passion. I offered a compromise. I would shorten the coastal trip to 1 night if he publicly supported my speech and railway project. He said the problem was no longer 1 night or 1 man. It was the pattern. I used private pain as public content, then called every reaction control. I told him he was analyzing me instead of loving me. He admitted analysis was easier than vulnerability. I did not stop. I said late, honesty did not erase years of neglect. Before he answered, Nora Chen arrived carrying copied pages from the leather contact book. Yellow notes covered the margins. Asked. Declined. Approved. Unclear. She explained that several people had received invitations from Luca without knowing how he obtained their details. I said relationships did not belong to my husband. Nora replied that people belong to themselves. After she left, 9 invitees withdrew. Priya stopped forwarding messages. Cassidy took 4 hours to answer 1 question. I changed tactics. The railway opening would become my personal launch, and success would make every concern look petty to everyone involved. The week before the railway launch became a campaign. Luca's team built a black and gold website with my photograph beside his and called us the Creative Partnership, redefining private cultural events in the city. No contract had been signed, but Luca said confidence had to arrive before permission. Of course, that sounded like courage to me. Cassidy had agreed to manage the rollout, yet 2 days before the launch, she claimed a client emergency required her full attention. I sent her the final promotional video. The message showed as read. No answer followed. I told myself she was uncomfortable because I had moved beyond the version of me she knew how to advise. The guest list reached 160 names. 32 came from Harbour Arts. 48 came from the Leather Contact Book. The rest belonged to Luca's investors, local journalists, artists, and city officials. I counted every category twice. A full room meant the objections had failed. My husband spent those days acting like a polite tenant. He cooked for Sophie, drove her to school, and slept behind the office door. He stopped asking where I went. He no longer corrected the things I posted. His silence looked like surrender. On Thursday evening, I found him sitting on the front steps with 2 cups of coffee. One waited in the place where I used to sit beneath a grey blanket on Sunday mornings. I joined him because part of me still wanted him to fight. Not with careful questions. Not with another calm explanation. I wanted fear. I wanted proof that losing me could make him lose control. My husband turned his phone face down on the wooden step and aligned both cups with the edge. 1, 2. He said he would make one final offer. I would remove the edited rooftop video, return the contact book, cancel the night at Luca's coastal house, and speak to Sophie with him. In return, he would attend counselling and answer every question I believed he had avoided. The offer was real. It was also late. I told him the one thing he could not deny. He had made me feel like another responsibility he knew how to manage. When I needed desire, he gave me help. When I asked whether he still saw me as a woman, he discussed childcare, bills, or sleep. He had loved me through systems because systems protected him from standing emotionally exposed beside me. My husband did not argue. He said I was right. The admission took the satisfaction from my accusation. He added that his failure explained why I had been lonely, but it did not explain why I used that loneliness to humiliate him. I told him he did not get to decide what my pain justified. Then I took out my phone and posted the final launch video while sitting beside him. It showed Luca's hand at my waist, the railway hall behind us, and the edited part of my rooftop speech. The caption said I was choosing a life where love did not require permission. I told my husband that I would leave the launch with Luca and spend the night at his coastal house. He could accept it and remain married to me, or he could lose me. The same choice. This time, public. My voice became sharper while his became quieter. He picked up his coffee and said he would not repeat the offer. I accused him of giving up because he had never known how to fight for anything that could not be placed in a folder. He said fighting was not the same as competing inside a story whose ending I had already written. I asked whether that was another one of his cold summaries. He answered that he would handle everything properly from then on. No threat. No details. He carried both cups inside and left the second one untouched on the kitchen counter. I read his calm exactly as he expected me to read it. Acceptance. The next morning, Nora confirmed she would attend the launch. Priya asked whether the seating plan was final. 2 sponsors who had withdrawn requested entry again. A journalist wanted to know whether my husband would be present. Every message looked like interest. Luca called from the railway hall and said his investors were impressed by the names I had brought. He promised we would discuss my ownership share after the event. I asked whether he meant an equal share. He said details could wait until after we proved ourselves. That answer did not worry me for long. On launch day, I wore white because Cassidy once said white made a woman look innocent and expensive at the same time. My husband looked over the printed guest list, turned his phone face down, and aligned the pages. I told him to stop performing indifference because the whole room would see the truth that evening. He said he hoped they did. By 7, the restored railway hall glowed beneath the old iron arches. Cream place cards covered every table. Nora stood near the stage. Priya sat with 3 board members. Several names from the leather book filled the front rows. The room had come. The lights shifted toward the stage, and Luca prepared to introduce me. I had forced my husband to choose. He had gone quiet. I was still standing beneath the lights. That meant I had won. Luca walked onto the stage first and thanked the investors, sponsors, and community leaders. Then he invited me forward. The applause was careful. I stepped beneath the lights and looked across the railway hall. My husband sat beside Nora at the front table. One cream place card rested before him. Mine. The chair beside it was empty. I began my speech about courage and reinvention, but the words that had sounded powerful online disappeared beneath the iron arches. 3 tables, 9 glasses, 5 people looking toward Nora instead of me. I counted until the silence became too clear to ignore. Luca moved closer to announce our first sponsors, but Nora stood and asked for the complete rooftop recording to be played. I said this was not the place for a private disagreement. She replied that the recording involved everyone whose name and reputation had been used to promote the launch. My husband turned his phone face down. He aligned my place card with the edge of the table. Then he stood and smiled. It was not warmth. It was completion. He said the first time he straightened my place cards, I had already given him the choice I later repeated in public. He had never needed to argue about what I meant. He only needed to stop helping me change the meaning afterward. The screen behind me changed. Cassidy's edited video disappeared. The complete rooftop recording began. Nothing new appeared. That was what made it worse. The room watched me remove my husband's card and replace it with Luca's. They heard me compare them. They saw Luca's hand at my waist. They heard my husband ask whether I meant the ultimatum privately and publicly. They heard me confirm it. Then the recording continued beyond Cassidy's cut. The silence remained. Sponsors left. Nora spoke with the hotel manager. My husband asked the videographer to preserve everything. I placed both hands on the lectern, but the wood felt too narrow beneath my palms. I told the room the recording proved only that my marriage had been unhappy. Priya stood and said my husband had never asked anyone to choose between us. He had only sent the complete recording after my edited version used their faces and names to support claims they had never approved. My explanation did not land. Nora announced that Harbour Arts would not join the railway project, and that I would no longer manage sponsor relationships because I had shared private contacts without consent. One donor turned his cream card face down. Then another followed. Paper touched wood around the room. Luca's phone began vibrating. His investor whispered to him near the stage. Luca walked to the control desk and ordered the technician to remove the slide containing both our photographs. The company logo remained. My face disappeared. I asked what he was doing. He said the venue agreement depended on sponsors and verified contacts. Then he left through the staff corridor with his investor and did not return. I searched the room for Cassidy. She was not there. My husband placed a plain envelope beside my card and said it contained a divorce petition and temporary property order, with the next appointment listed on the first page. 2 weeks later, I lived in a furnished apartment above a pharmacy while he remained in our home with Sophie. My income fell after Harbour Arts transferred me into internal administration. Tessa answered messages about Sophie but stopped discussing my marriage. Luca sent one email stating that our proposed company had never become a formal partnership. The complete rooftop video replaced the edited version whenever anyone searched my name. My husband admitted his silence had damaged our marriage, but he said silence had not copied the contact book, ignored our daughter, or repeated an ultimatum before strangers. He was not innocent. He was simply finished protecting me from the full shape of my own choices. I had believed freedom meant nobody could question me while someone else still absorbed the cost. I wanted 2 men to prove I could not be forgotten. One stopped fighting for me. The other removed my photograph before the chairs were stacked. The cream place card now sits on my temporary dining table with no table number beneath my name. I told my husband to accept one night with Luca or lose me, and by the end of that launch there was not a single seat left waiting for me.